The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions of WBGR Network. Any questions or concerns about what is said should be directed to the show host, whose information will be provided upon request.
Blessings, blessings. Good morning. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Sis We Need to Talk. I am your host, Tisha Hillman. We are here each and every Monday. That's not a holiday. Each and every Monday talking to my sisters about our intentions, how they manifest, and how we can actually create what we say that we want. If we just, are not intellectually dishonest with ourselves and making sure that what we say we want and what manifests are congruent with one another. So I hope that there is something that you learn from this show that will help you to be a better person today than you were yesterday, because after all, my loves, that is the goal. Always strive to be better than you were the day before, the moment before, the hour before, by making different choices. So with that said, today's episode will be brought to you by Leap. If you need a lawyer, which a lot of people need lawyers in this day and age, so if you find yourself needing a lawyer, but you also find yourself in a situation where you may not be able to afford the retainers or the hourly rates that are generally charged by attorneys, please call Leap. Leap is an organization, Leap is a group of attorneys who have collectively decided to give back to the community by lowering their rates in order to give back to the community. So myleaplawyer.com. You can also call at 240-528-7118. Now, there's so much to talk about. If you guys were here last week, I was joined by a gentleman by the name of Bruce Oliver, and we had a great conversation about love and what it looks like, redefining love for our communities, for ourselves, for our relationships. And if you guys want to take a look at it, you can certainly look at it on WBGR Network, WBGR Entertainment, on Roku, on YouTube, on Facebook. It's out there. So I hope you guys take a look at it, share it, because it is time that we redefine, or even define for the first time, if you will, what love actually means. Because if you've ever watched the show, you know that I believe wholeheartedly, it's an inner knowing that love and our connections to each other are the keys to unlocking our power. And so my sisters and anyone else that is listening and paying attention to the show, please understand what I'm saying. Take a look at it. I hope you find something that will be valuable to your experience. Now, today's show is, I know, going to cause some controversy. I don't set out for the purpose of causing controversy because, being black is controversial enough. I don't need the controversy. However, I love my people. And if having people say certain things or, being triggered, if that's what sparks my people to think deeper, then so be it. So I want to talk about toxic femininity. And are we ready to talk about that, y'all, or not? Are we ready to talk about it? And so I'm not even going to talk about trending topics because I know that this is a very weighted and heavy discussion. The thing that I find interesting, though, is how the notion of toxic femininity will spark the ire of many, 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 many women. And I know that. But one of the things that I think is missing in the conversation is, why are we so quick to throw out the idea of toxic masculinity But then we get all in our feelings when someone says that you might not be perfect, sis. You might got some shit with you, sis. You know, you might got some things going on that you might need to address. You might not be perfect. Why is that triggering to us? Why do we not stand up when someone calls our men toxic, but when someone calls us toxic, now it's a problem? That, and therein lies the problem. Because we can give the smoke, but we don't want the smoke. We don't want our viewpoints challenged. We don't want our beliefs challenged. And what that tells me is that we actually don't want to grow. Because the only way that a tree, a plant, a flower, anything, the only way that it grows is through tension, right? It has to be pruned. It has to be watered and, all these things, but it has to be pruned to make sure that it can continue to grow. And if you guys, a couple weeks ago, I did a show entitled Shine Bright Like a Diamond. And I talked about how diamonds are formed. And without the pressure and without the heat, you will never have a diamond. Same thing with gold. You will never have pure gold if it's not purified. It has to be purified, pure, right? It has to be made pure because it's not pure. You are not pure. And what I mean when I say that is you are not infallible. You are a human being just like our brothers are. And so we need to have this talk. We need, whether you're ready or not, my sisters, we need to have this talk. And so we will today. And as I've said before on the show, and I will say it again, if you are triggered, always remember that when there is a barrel of a gun pointed in your face, that lets you know that you are not free. And so if you are triggered by anything that is said on the show, I hope that you sit with that emotion and that you examine yourself instead of projecting your inner feelings on me. Examine yourself and examine why you are triggered. Because if something can cause a vitriolic response or cause you to be triggered, as they say, that should lead you to the place. So that it will lead you to the place to where you are not free. And I hope if we are really interested in Black girl magic, as we say, we're really interested in uplifting our families and ourselves and our brothers and our communities, then you got to do some work too. We can't just expect men to shoulder the burden of being overly incarcerated, undereducated, overly policed, executed by police, hated by women, victims of the Me Too movement. You know what I mean? Like, we can't do that and then expect our men to have the wherewithal emotionally to also carry our baggage. Now, that's a whole nother show. That's a whole nother show because we got problems in our community that need to be addressed. And all I'm saying, my sisters, is that these issues, a lot of them can start and end with us. What do I mean when I say that? Well, think about where life begins. Yes, you do need male sperm, but you also need a female womb. And the womb is a very, very powerful place. And we've talked about that on the show before. So go back and listen to some of the shows that I've done before on the female reproductive system and the power that is in your womb, my sisters. So if we say that we are the mothers of this earth, let's just take things one step at a time. If we say that we are the mothers of this earth, right? If we believe that we are originals, I don't know what everyone believes, but I'm just going by what I hear, right? And my personal beliefs. And so if we believe the things that we actually say, if we carry it back to its logical conclusion, what that means is if you are the mother, all these your badass kids. And if these are your children, is it not also your responsibility for how your children turn out? If Black mothers, right, grandmothers, if in our culture, historically, we have had matriarchal culture, and we have, let's make no mistake about it. And I don't think that that's actually a bad thing per se. But in terms of this matriarchal culture where there was big mama in the house, there's grandma and aunties and, women doing their part, women did play a major role in the upbringing and rearing of our children. All the way back to the 70s. And you've heard me talk about this on the show before too. The 60s and the 70s, when Black women were, when the project was created, right? After the war, projects were created for soldiers to have a place to live. But what ended up happening is, as Jay-Z said, the reason they call it a project, because it's a project. It's a project. And so you get a bunch of people that have limited access to resources, things like that. And you put them all in an enclosed space and see what happens, right? And what happens, as we know, is violence ensues, all of these things, right? It's like a human zoo it becomes, because poverty and crime goes hand in hand. Because if people cannot meet their basic needs, because they are human beings, if human beings cannot meet their basic needs, they do behave like animals. Hear what I'm saying? Not saying that we are animals. I'm saying that every human being on the face of this earth is a mammal, and you have the ability to behave like animals. And so when you don't get your needs met and you're hungry, what happens? You go into survival mode. And what that means is you will do anything in order to make sure you can eat, your children can eat, and you can survive. Now, when they did this, they offered Black women the opportunity to get government assistance, so long as there was no man living in the home. And that, in my humble opinion, if I'm looking at history and I'm looking at culture and looking at all of these things, that is where a lot of our problems started. Because think about it. Before then, we did have Big Mama. We did have, women in the households. We had men in the household raising the children, disciplining the children, right? It's the usually the father figure that provides the discipline. Not saying that mothers can't discipline and fathers can't nurture, but what I'm saying is traditionally that's how it has been, because men are just created different. I don't care if you like it. It's just true. Men are not the same as women. We are different people. And, if you don't believe that to be true, look at now all people getting upset about transgender women who are essentially Black men. Call it what it is. Transgender women winning races and running sports, and now people are upset. Either it is or it isn't. Either it's a woman or it's not. But genetically, we are different, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. So you kick the man out the house, and now you got women raising the children. And so what happens? Because now she has to make sure that she can work or do something to provide for these children, because now the father's not in the household. So now you have poverty and lack. And I mean lack in terms of lack of resources, lack of guidance, lack of discipline. Because I don't care what anybody says, everybody needs discipline. Everybody needs discipline. That's a part of life, discipline. And so just as if you were training to get better in a sport or whatever the case may be, you know that, well, damn, I can't eat hamburgers every day because that's going to be counterproductive for my goal. And so the only people who don't have discipline are those who don't have goals. And so if you are trying to reach a certain goal, you know that you cannot just open up yourself to a free-for-all and expect a positive result if you have a goal, right? And if your goal is progress. Now, if your goal is to stay the same, then that's one thing. But discipline. So when the discipline is not in the household, what ends up happening? Now you have a situation where you have the little boys in the house that are required to take up the slack. And this is one of the things, my sisters, that I see very often. And I hope we can have an honest conversation about these things. Because what I'm not saying that it's all black women, it's all your fault, our society's screwed. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is we've placed so much of the burden of the rearing of our families on the absence of men. But what about the presence of women? Do the two not have the same effect? Or do they just not have any effect? Is it just there's only an effect when there's an absence of men? Is there no effect when there's the presence of a woman who is not nurturing, not watching the children? You know what I mean? Like, what effect does that have? And that's something that we don't talk about. We don't talk about it. Now, I want to pause for a second, because as we talk about the men not being present in the home, and how that all started, and then the young boys having to be named the man of the house at 5 or 6 when he's just trying to play with his Legos or whatever little boys do. You know what I mean? Now he has to have this inner knowing that now he's the man of the house and what that means. And so when this man of the house starts talking back to you, disrespecting you, not being in a child's place, you can't ask him on one hand to be a man and then on the other hand chastise him when he's trying to be a man. In the same vein, now if you grow up in a situation where there's no resources, lack of education, you got to be the man of the house because there's no man in the house. Mom has needs, mom has to go to work, you got other siblings, whatever the case may be. Now this little boy has to go out and figure how, with, all of these obstacles against him, how to take care of his mom. Because little boys want to take care of their mom. I don't know a single little boy who does not want to take care of his mom. And so he's going to go out and do what he needs to do to take care of his mom. And so now, mom, you put this child in a situation where you force them to grow up. And so then when they do, what happens? What happens? When he's selling drugs or robbing people or whatever you do when you have limited education, limited resources, hardship, no tools, no nothing. And you're being raised in a jungle that's always violent, that's always harsh. What happens? And so I just hope that we can examine some of our decisions. And that brings me to stories that we've been hearing as of late, where little kids, specifically little black girls, are being killed and or raped by mom's boyfriends. This is heartbreaking, because I know this story far too well. It's a story that I've heard. It's a story that I've witnessed. It's a story that, I've been a part of, and I've shared that before on the story, on the show. But that's why I want to have this conversation about toxic femininity. Because my sisters, be honest. Let's just have an honest conversation with ourselves. When you have a situation where there's no man in the house for whatever reason, but you're introducing multiple men to your children. And one of the things that I remember growing up is, seeing situations where women would introduce a different man as the child's father or the child's uncle. So you could walk around here with 45 different play uncles because they're all men that your mom has dated or slept with, right? So imagine how confusing, from a child's perspective, imagine how confusing that is, especially if they don't know their dad or they don't have a close relationship with their dad. Imagine how confusing that is for a child. And now because you trust this man, you now entrust your baby to this man. and he harms your baby. Is that your baby's fault? And I don't say this to, make people, feel guilty or anything, because guilt is a useless emotion. It's useless. So I'm not saying it to make you feel guilty, but what I am saying is it should inform our decision making. That's always my goal. If something can inform our decision making so that we make better decisions, then it puts us in a better place. And so when we talk about protecting our children, that just doesn't mean protecting them from, I don't know, from the dangers outside. What about the dangers inside? What about the dangers inside? And so we got to examine that. Examine where that comes from. Because one of the things that that I realized, I was reading, you guys have heard me talk about this book before, The ISIS Papers by Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. And it's The Keys to the Colors is the subtitle. But in this book, there's one particular thing that I read that I wanted to talk about. And it says, now this is talking about, in the aspect of race, but I do think that it can be applied in multiple facets. But it says the initial psychological defense maneuver was the repression of the initial painful awareness of inadequacy. This primary ego defense was reinforced by a host of other defense mechanisms. One of the most important of these defense mechanisms was reaction formation, a response that converts at a psychological level something desired and envied but wholly unattainable into something discredited and despised. Now, if I'm being honest with myself, and honest about the conversations that I have with people and what I'm seeing, I think a lot of us have experienced what I like to refer to as broken promises. And if you've listened to this show before, you've heard me talk about these broken promises. And as young girls, many of the people that I know, including myself, have been raped or molested or, sexually abused in some capacity at a very young age. That changes you. It changes the way that you perceive sex. It changes the way you perceive love. It alters you. Now, when you have a situation where you've been traumatized sexually or physically or whatever the case may be, emotionally, at a young age, it stunts your emotional development. So emotionally, you remain at that place. So say, for instance, like for me, I think the first time it happened, I must have been like 7. So emotionally, I behaved like a 7-year-old. Now, I'm a fully grown woman, but emotionally, when it comes to relationships with men, until I got to the place where I was ready to change, I behaved emotionally like a 7-year-old. Very mind, very egocentric, right? Because kids are very egocentric. Because the ego is about the outward representation as opposed to what's happening internally. It's a mask, if you will. And so what happens is when you have these reaction formations, and so this is what when we talk about being triggered, you're triggered by these reactions from something that is desired and envied, but yet wholly unattainable, to something that's despised, discredited, and despised. And when I think about that, I think about how many of my sisters have heard the false narrative that black men don't want you. You're too black, you're too ugly, your hair's too nappy. We heard these things growing up, back when, y'all remember when light skin was in, back in the day, in the 80s, 90s too, maybe 2000s. But my point is, all of these things have an impact. And so when you take someone in a situation of trauma, boys, girls, or otherwise, in a situation of trauma, and you compound that trauma with more trauma, more trauma, more trauma, more reinforcement, right? More reinforcement to say you are nothing more than your body. You are nothing more than what you can give sexually. You internally, you start to believe that. And so that's what you start to project. And so you go on slut walks and you say, you know, I should be able to screw as many men as I want. Understand what's happening. Understand what's happening. And if you're being honest with yourself, most women, and I'm not saying all women, most women do not derive pleasure from having sex with numerous and, you know, unlimited men just for the sake of doing it. Most women are not built that way. And so it's a projection. And so I ask, what happened inside? What are these broken promises inside that led to this place? Because there is something. And I hope that we will look inside and really examine that, because that creates this toxic femininity, because you're not being intellectually honest with yourself. Instead, you're projecting, and we all do it, but we got to work at it. You start to project your own sense of inadequacy on other people. And that's the problem, because you can't expect someone to know what's going on inside of you and to fix you, because fixing you, my love, is your responsibility. You may have been hurt or abused or anything at a young age, as I was, but the responsibility falls on you, because it's your life. It's your freedom that we're talking about. And if you are a mother to these children, then absolutely, because your children, specifically your little boys, are going to be the first to look for you in terms of how they should expect to be treated by women. What does love look like? I look at my mom for what love looks like. I look at the relationship between my mom and my dad for what love looks like in a romantic sense. And so if we have this, celebration of freedom of sex and all this kind of stuff, and we're overly sexualizing children, to have them thinking that at 5 years old, that they should be having discussions about their own gender identity. And I mean, you know what I mean? Like all of these things, what are we doing? I would simply say that we're projecting our own fears, our own inadequacies on our babies. And it's harmful. I assure you it's harmful to the next generation. And this is why I want to talk about this, because if you believe the false narrative that you are, you want love, you want, close relationships, you want fidelity, you want all of these things, but you absolutely believe, because society has told you, that it's unattainable. If I believe what Dr. Cress Welsing says, even from a racial lens, it turns it into something discredited and despised. And so I ask myself, is that the reason so many of us have, in essence, turned against our own men, our own reflection? Because we may want these things, we may want, love and all of these things, but because society has told us black men ain't this, they never gonna be this, they're terrible, they're liars, they're this, they don't marry you anyway. You too dark skinned, you too fat, you too. If we believe those things, then to me, there's no wonder why we are saying things like, well, the future is female. I'm just rooting for black women. Screw these men. So I want to take a break and let it breathe. And when I come back, I want to talk about this article that I read that kind of goes in line with what I'm saying. And the article is entitled, "Boys Underperform in Schools Because We Look After Their Well-Being Less." And so I want to talk about that. So come forward in a few moments and we'll pick up where we left off.
Hey guys, I'm Asia Morgan, an intern at WBGR Network and a proud senior of Morgan State University. Here's a few pointers on campus and community safety. Use your eyes and stay alert. Studies show that looking a predator directly in their face causes them to be less likely to choose you as their victim because you then have the means to easily identify them. Focus on your surroundings and not your phone. And never walk alone. Walk in pairs or in groups wherever you go because we are stronger in numbers. If that's not possible, use safety services. Universities have escort services available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Take advantage when leaving late night study sessions, parties, or anything else where you will be usually traveling alone. And when using riding services like Lyft or Uber, always check to see that you're getting into the right car. If you're traveling alone, be a backseat rider, buckle up no matter what, and never forget to share the details of your trip with a friend or family member. Lastly, trust your instincts. If you feel like something is wrong, 9 times out of 10, it usually is. Don't ignore that feeling. This has been a message from the WBGR PSA Project.
Welcome forward. You are on Sis We Need to Talk, and again, I'm Tisha Hillman. This segment is brought to you by the Law Office of Tisha S. Hillman. If you need an attorney in the Maryland area, in the areas of family law, criminal law, or personal injury, be sure to contact the Law Office of Tisha S. Hillman at 301-744-7996. You can also visit the website at www.tshillmanlaw.com. Now, before we went to break, we were talking about this article. It's from 2 years, no, actually now 3 years ago. And it's entitled, Boys Underperform in Schools Because We Look After Their Well-Being Less. And we were talking about the idea of toxic femininity. Now, I want to go back for just a second. There's a quote, I think it's an MLK quote, and it says, if you are neutral, actually I'm pretty sure it is, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. And my sisters, this is one of the reasons that that these topics are so important for me, because I understand that our children are under assault. And if you don't believe me, look at the news. Look at the news. And not just our children, our men. So we're talking about our present and our future being under assault. And if you don't see that, I'm not really sure what else to tell you to convince you of that. And so if we as women can look at the fact that our little boys are overly policed and profiled as young as like 5, 6, 7. You know, I saw something recently where like SWAT like busted up in the house like early in the morning, handcuffed an 8-year-old boy, and the mom is like pleading for this child's life, like he's just a little boy. And later on, the officer's like, "Oh, I thought, I didn't know that he was a kid." But this is what happens often with our children, and we know this. History has taught us this, and so this is why any movement, and I've said this and I'll say it till I'm blue in the face, any movement that tells me that my future, my boys, my daughters are toxic, specifically my boys are toxic, is not something that I want to align myself with. Because you're telling me that my future is cancerous, and like cancer, it should be cut off. I can't rock with you. If you're telling me that my present is toxic, my men, my brothers, my uncles, my father are toxic and should be cut off like cancer, I can't rock with you. Because I have to ask myself, if I'm looking at things for what they are, how is it that you can want to end my lifeline, your lifeline, and not see the irony in that? So, be careful that you're not out here choosing the side of the oppressor. And we can do that in a number of ways. But one of the ways that we can do it is by turning a blind eye to it. And this is why this quote is so important, because if you can remain neutral and stay in your comfort zone, Stay killing it with your black girl magic, making six figures, buying your nice cars, buying your house, going on girl trips, but do nothing when you see all of these things that are happening to our future, my future, your future, our present. Someone's husband's out there getting shot by police. You know what I mean? Someone's father's out there getting shot by police. So if all that we can do as black women is to have a reactionary response via social media outrage, then we're truly not interested in change. If we can know that our boys are underperforming, our children are committing suicide, our children don't want to live anymore. And if we can look at those things and still say, I'm going to brunch and I'm going to live my best life. I'm not saying don't live your best life. Not what I'm saying. Not the point. The point is, we got to do something. It's not, we cannot be neutral because it's our future. It's our present that is under assault. And we got to remember that. And so not using it as an opportunity to project, as I said before. And, projection is a defense mechanism. And according to Wikipedia, it's one, or I think it's like Sociology Wikipedia or something like that, in which the human ego defends itself against unconscious impulses or qualities, both positive and negative, by denying their existence in themselves while attributing them to others. And so this is why I talk about toxic femininity, because if we're saying to our brothers, no, there's not a problem with me, it's all you. It's your absence. It's your absence. It's your absence instead of my presence. Could both things not possibly be true? I would venture to say that they are. Let me give you an example. So, if many of you don't know, in my professional life, I'm an attorney. And so one of the areas of practice that I do is family law. One of the things that I see very, very often, and I kid you not, like 99.9% of the time, the problem is usually my sisters who say, well, he got a new girlfriend, I don't want her around my child. Or, he came 15 minutes late, he forfeits his visitation. Or he missed a child support payment, he can't have visitation. Or I just want to, most of the time, I just want to control the situation, so I want to control when he can have access to this child. Or my favorite is, well, I bought all of these clothes, and so I'm not going to send my child to him with anything. If he wants time with the child, he's going to see how this feel. He want to step up and be a dad, then let him do it. Then I'm not sending the child with nothing. No drawers, no food, no toothbrush, nothing. Do you know how often this happens? And so when we say, we want our children to succeed, and I look at things like that over and over and over and over and over, so much so that I could write a book about it. I have to ask myself, for me, it begs the question, are those things in conflict? Because I think they are. Because either you want the child to have a better relationship with the father, or you don't. Either you see the value that fathers have. Men have value, sisters. They have value. Without them, you cannot exist. Period. And I want to talk about that. You cannot exist without them. They cannot exist without you. You are interconnected, whether you like it or not. It is what it is. And so as you jump on these bandwagons of telling you that, there's no such thing as gender and men don't matter, and that's bullshit. Bullshit. Because who is going to get you pregnant to have a baby? Who? Who? If you want men that like men, they're not going to like you, right? They're not going to like you. And what happens? You don't procreate, your population declines, right? That is just what happens. It's not about hate. It's just, it just is. We are different. Men and women are genetically different. It's okay. So when you find yourself hopping on these bandwagons of this women's empowerment, ask yourself, to what end? What are they empowering you to do, right? Are they empowering you to actually hate people who look like you? To hate the reflection in the mirror? To hate your own children that come from your body? To hate the man that you are procreating with? Can't rock with that, right? Can't rock with that. Because you're trying to ensure my genetic annihilation. You are trying to ensure that I do not exist in the future. So on one hand, we have law enforcement doing it. On the other hand, we have ourselves doing it subconsciously. So my sisters, be careful of this idea of toxic masculinity, because if they're telling you that all of your men are toxic, ask yourself why. If the only ones who are safe, the only men who are safe, think about this. And you guys, I talk about this all the time. I have no issue with the LGBT community. A lot of my friends are gay folks. But I just want to be clear and factual in this, right? If we are saying black straight men, because that's what's being said, be clear. Black straight men are toxic. So the only black men who we need to pay attention to their deaths are those who are executed by white law enforcement, or those who are wearing a dress that identify as transgender. So what you are telling me is that my man doesn't matter unless he's dressed like a woman. That makes him more important. So what's happening is, instead of equality, it's not about equality anymore, so much as it is about supremacy. It's all under the same token of white supremacy, and we fall for it. We got to be careful with this stuff, folks. We got to be careful, because there's a reason why these things are happening, and I hope you are wise enough to pay attention to why it's happening. Again, it's not about hate. It's about just looking at the facts for what things are. And if we start with the premise that we live under a system of white supremacy and everything under the system is done to promote and uphold that system, then ask yourself some basic questions. You're smart. You're capable. You're magical, right? You're killing the game. Ask yourself some basic fundamental questions. If the only black men that we want to really highlight and celebrate, are black trans men or black trans women, who basically, they are black men though. They are born black men. And so I saw this article that said, I think it was like within a year span, I think it was like 13 black trans women, or trans women were murdered. And I hate that. That breaks my heart, right? Because anytime anybody is murdered, like, that's just terrible, right? But the thing that I really want to focus on is 13. Hundreds die in Baltimore every day. Or, I'm sorry, every year. Hundreds. Hundreds die in Chicago every year. Hundreds. Why are we taking the time? Not saying that it's not right, but I'm asking, what's happening? Why is it that if a black man, dresses like a woman, we should pay attention to that more than the hundreds who were straight, presumptively, who are dead? Because it doesn't change the fact that they're dead, all of them, right? But why are we making it so that I only care about your death if you're wearing a dress, or you're dressed like a woman, but not yours? That's something's wrong with that. Something's wrong with that. And so when our little boys know that it's not safe to be a little boy, is our reaction that we want our little boys to dress like women and to become women? Because I assure you, sisters, no matter what you tell yourself, you can tell yourself that bullshit if you want to. Tell yourself that if you want to. Because here's the thing. Make no mistake about it. All these bandwagons that we're talking about, where there's no gender and all these things, and, let's just celebrate, and toxic masculinity, and straight men suck, and Black woman, hear me, because I know you hear me. I know, and you know, that if your son, no, let's scratch that. We are essentially raising, because we say that we're raising the kids, right? We are raising little boys that we would never, ever, ever want to date or marry. Ever. And we know that. How many times have we heard a Black woman say, yeah, sure, I'll date an effeminate man? Never. I don't hear that. I never hear Black women say stuff like that. We want a man who's 6 feet tall, who's a Mandingo warrior. We want a warrior. Not, again, not absolutes, not everybody, right? There are exceptions. But I have personally never heard a Black woman say to my face or any place else that I want a man who, I know that he's effeminate and I'm okay with that. No, we don't say that. So my question to you is, why are we okay with jumping on the bandwagon to say, let's raise our boys in this way? You know what I mean? Let's hope that our men behave in this way. I'm not saying that there's anything, wrong with someone, being gay or what. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is we're lying to ourselves. That's the part that I have a problem with. If you're okay with that, then be okay with that. But if you're not, don't lie to yourself. Because that's what got us in this mess. We're being intellectually dishonest. So we're saying one thing and we're doing another, and the results that we're getting are chaotic. So if we truly believe that we are the mothers of this earth, that we are Black queens, that all life derives through us, does some of the responsibility to make sure that our children are raised properly not fall back on us? Is that not our responsibility? Is it not our responsibility to foster a great relationship between our children and their fathers? Even if the father chose not to be there, should you not make the effort to make sure that these children have a great relationship? Should you not send the child to the father's house with underwear or with a toothbrush or with clothes? You know what I mean? Because we do these things out of spite. And this is why I said, when did you feel the promise to you was broken? Because I can tell you what it was for me. The promise for me was broken when I felt like I was unlovable and unwanted because my father wasn't there. I felt like no one would ever love me because if my own father didn't love me, nobody would ever love me. And that's what I projected. And that's what I attracted. Because energy doesn't lie, right? Energy doesn't lie. And so that's what I was projecting. And so I was wondering why I kept attracting the same types of men over and over and over. And why I kept feeling so vulnerable. And eventually I got to the place where I stopped feeling vulnerable and I started punishing everybody. I started punishing people for how I was treated. And like I said before on the show, if you don't heal the wound, you will bleed on those who didn't cut you. And until we can go back and heal mentally the chasm in our own lives, we will be doing a disservice to our children, to our families, to our communities. And I'm saying to you, sisters, it's very possible. It's very possible. You can do it today. You can do it now. You know what I mean? This isn't something that takes years and years and years, right? It's a matter of going back and giving that little girl what she needed, whether it be love, a hug, protection, whatever it may be, but giving her that. And you give her that by being that for someone else. And so if you did not feel love when you were younger, show these babies love. If you did not feel heard, hear these babies. Because just like you wouldn't want somebody to look at your son and say he's toxic, the future's female, he doesn't deserve to be here. Oh, I know he's 8, but he looks 15. Therefore, I'm going to treat him like a grown-ass man. And I'm going to impute all of this knowledge, wisdom, understanding on this child. You wouldn't want that done to your baby. Don't do that to someone else's. Simply because you've been hurt or gone through some hard times, don't do that to somebody else's child. Because you wouldn't want someone to do that to your baby. Because, my loves, you can't control how people treat your baby out in this world. But you certainly can control what's reinforced at home. And so all I'm simply saying is don't reinforce things that make our boys feel like their well-being matters less. You know, I was thinking about how, as women, when it comes to our girls, we like to treat them like little doll babies. We like to dress them up, make sure they look cute, make sure their outfits are done. But I realize that a lot of times we don't give that same attention to our boys. And God forbid if the boy looks like his father and we hate the father. Projection. So this is what I talk about healing. The generational healing that we have to do to make sure that we're not passing down our own unhealed trauma onto our babies, because that's a recipe for disaster. And what we don't want is to raise little boys who don't know how to be men, who don't know how to take responsibility, who don't know how to accept discipline. I'm not saying, anyway, I'll move on from that. But we don't want that. And so if we don't want that, then we need to not engage in that with other people's children. And so sometimes that does mean not listening to the mainstream news and the mainstream people and the loudest voices. And because here's the thing, the loudest voices are given a platform for a reason. Ask yourself why. That's all I'm saying. Ask yourself why certain voices are given a platform and others are not. Because if those voices did not go with the agenda, I guarantee you those voices would be silenced. Or they certainly would not be promoted. They would not be promoted. Because remember, we live in a society where people don't give a damn about diversity of thought. People don't even think for themselves, let alone diversity of thought. As a matter of fact, you're yelled down, screamed at, called a homophobe, transphobe, racial, racist, anything but a child of God if you don't agree hook, line, and sinker with every single thing on the menu. Right? I don't get to be a vegan in a barbecue restaurant, right? And that's what we're experiencing right now. You don't get to be a vegan in a barbecue restaurant. You got to eat this goddamn meat and shut up. Right? That's what society is telling us. And so, once again, we ask ourselves why. What is happening when you're not allowed to have your own thoughts, unless your own thoughts and opinions, unless they also belong to the collective, right? Unless it's just like everybody else. You can't have your own thought process unless there's something wrong with you. So, when we talk about women's empowerment, you can't have women's empowerment without men and boys. Why do I say that? Because we need them, just like they need us. And we need strong men in our communities. I don't see women marching and lining up with guns to protect us. That black lady in Texas who, got mollywopped by that white dude. People were, we're always looking for our men to protect us, but simultaneously telling them that we don't need their protection. We're always telling our men, I'm an independent woman, I can pay for my own meals, and then get upset with him and lambaste him when he chooses to go Dutch. So what do we want? So do you want women's empowerment? Or do we want unity? Do we understand that we need our boys? We need our men. Because sisters, like it or not, men are genetically stronger. They are stronger than you are. So if all hell break loose in these here streets, If all hell break loose in these here streets, I'm just saying, I'm a bad chick. But I also understand that I want my hedge of protection. And I hope that we don't get so caught up in our own emotional baggage and our own hurt that we turn away the hedge of protection that God has put here for us, and that is our men. God put them here as our hedge of protection. Just like he put us here to show them how to nurture and how to love, right? How to teach them how to love. We all have a purpose, and those purposes are different. Not better, not worse, just different. And the sooner we learn to accept that, I believe the sooner we can understand how much our babies need us. Our babies need us. Right now, our communities are in absolute chaos. And if we're going to get out of this crab in a barrel, all these stereotypes that are very, very real, if we're going to get out of all of these things to actually advance our culture, our families, our communities, ourselves, we got to do some healing. Go back. Start from the place that the promise to you was broken. Whether it be your father, where he promised to protect you, because that's where it was for me. You know what I mean? I'm thinking that, I should have protection, but yet I was left exposed and I was taken advantage of. I was left vulnerable. My blind spot, my 6 was not covered by the man who I thought was supposed to cover it. And that caused a lot of internal conflict and chaos that took years to overcome, because it took me years to kind of see it. But my sisters, I love you. I thank you. I certainly hope that we can have these honest conversations, without name calling, yelling, you know how we do. You know how we do. But I also hope that we get to the place where we're not fighting the people that are trying to show us free, right? I thank you. I hope that your week is filled with love and light and blessings. And until next week, remember, you may have been given a lot of bags in this life, a lot of baggage, but you do not have to carry them all. There are people here. You have outlets, you have tools, but you got to use them. You got to tap into that hedge of protection that's been afforded you. And if you don't have that, create it. Create it for yourself. Because I know most of us have girlfriends, right? We have people that we can talk to. But you don't have to carry the burdens by yourself. You don't have to carry it by yourself. And so, sisters, I wish you wholeness. And until next week, take care.